so welcome back to another Krawler video. Today we're going to be doing test hands. I figured this would be better than doing combo videos simply because this deck doesn't really have combos to begin with, and even if it does, it's better off actually demonstrating in a realistic standpoint through actual test hands what combos can actually come out more often and what we can actually do with the opening hands. So with that being said, let's begin. Alright, so firstly, the deck was shuffled already, as you guys already saw by the intro earlier, but we're going to give it a quick few more shuffles here and just cut it up and we'll begin. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Alright, so for opening hand, not too bad at all. We got a Called by the Grave, which by the way it is a one of, so it is quite surprising that we managed to draw this, but it definitely will be a great way to stop our hand traps from the opponent, so it's definitely very fantastic. But that being said, this is a Krawler deck, so you can't really do too much anyway. But however, we do actually have a worm bait here, so you could already go into a link summon right away simply by summoning either Receptor or Dendrite and then activating worm bait, allowing you to then further going into a link summon if you guys actually feel that way. However, the most optimal play with this particular hand is you could set the Called by the Grave, you could also set the World Legacy's Mind Meld, which is definitely a very powerful card, and of course you could either set your Receptor or your Dendrite. Now the interesting thing is that both cards can actually be quite viable, but in this case I do want to actually get more cards to my hand, so I will most likely be setting down the Receptor. And that looks like a pretty optimal hand right there. However, in an alternative format where we might want to be a bit more on the aggressive side, I don't know why you would, but what you could do is you could instead normal summon either Receptor or Dendrite, activate the Worm Bait, and then you would have the 2 insect tokens, and from your choice of cards for what you want to go into, you could go into your Neurogos, which requires 2 insect monsters, in which case your 2 tokens would actually apply, and together with the Receptor you could link summon for link 3, and that could give you either your Seraphim Papillon, or you could even go for a Trigate or a Gaia Saber, which is pretty much just a beat stick. So it is completely up to you how you want to actually play this out, but those are pretty much the 2 options so far. So let's move on to the next hand. Alright, so we have over here a Terraforming, which is absolutely fantastic, of course. Doesn't matter whether or not we search it, because if anything it also just forces out an Ash if your opponent actually has one, and that would be fantastic. Alright, so now let's look for our Shadow, and we could probably activate it if you want, but if you don't want to reveal it to your opponents, well, either way they already know anyway, so you can activate it, and most likely this will kind of act as bait. Your opponent will actually be afraid of this card if they intend to attack any of your Krawlers. So in that case, they're most likely going to be destroying this if they have an MST, or if they have back row removal and they can only remove 1 card. So for that case, they'll most likely destroy this, and that way you actually get your World Legacy Pawns set right here as a very nice card to pretty much just set you off. And with what you have over here, you have your own Axon, but you also have your own Glial as well. Now in this case, Glial obviously doesn't work in the graveyard because there's nothing there, so I'm most likely going to be setting Axon because of the big defense, and we'll just keep our turn right there. Alright, so in this particular standpoint we actually have here a Called by the Grave, not bad. We have Mind Meld and we have Back to the Front. So Called by the Grave, we're actually getting quite lucky by actually drawing into it, despite the fact that it's at 1. But in this case, obviously Deus Ex Krawler is going to be very difficult to actually bring out, so this card can just stay in your hand. But we do have the Reversible Beetle, which is definitely quite a powerful card indeed, and you simply just set it face down and well, basically when it flips, then you get to shuffle anything back. So it's definitely going to be something that is very interesting. Depends if your opponent actually falls into the same column as the reversal beetle. Now, even though the reversal beetle might be destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you do have the back to the front. So what happens is you could pretty much just activate the back to the front the following turn or during your opponent's turn and summon it back. And as soon as it summons back, what's amazing about it is that it just immediately flips itself back down again. So if your opponent has something in a specific column, then they can't really move it, right? So in that case, as soon as it flips, you get to shuffle back their big boss monster. So it's definitely a really great strategy here, preparing you for the next turn, but actually also setting up a pretty decent defense. Alright, so over here for this particular opening hand, as you can see we have Mind Meld and Pawns, which is definitely very amazing. We also have Spine, which is one of our best openers for the deck. So right off the bat we could set the Spine and we could pretty much just set the Mind Meld and the Pawns as well, and that definitely is a really amazing start. Pawns can obviously trigger it as soon as you want, and at the same time Mind Meld could also just change the opponent's effect. You basically have the best opener ever, and while it looks like it's underwhelming and nothing's about to happen, this is one of the most powerful hands you could possibly have. To actually have a Spine, to actually have a Pawns, and to actually have a Mind Meld in the opening hand is incredibly powerful. And don't forget, you also have Axon and Ranvier, so Ranvier is also great recovery for them all as well. So even though you're just forcing your opponents to destroy this, to special summon more from the deck, you could easily recover it with the Ranvier at the ready. Alright, so with this particular opening hand, another Caught by the Grave, we're actually getting pretty lucky. And mind you, I am only playing one copy, I'm not playing 3 copies in this deck. So the fact that I'm able to draw into it so easily, quite amazing. Now let's begin with the World Legacy Survivor. We essentially get to excavate the top 5 cards of our deck, and if we do, we can add any excavated Krawler. 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have the choice here of either Receptor or the Glial. In this case, we already have Receptor, so most likely we're picking up the Glial, and yeah, that would be really nice. You could also pick a World Legacy card, so if you actually want Sorrow, or if you want the World Legacy in Shadow, or even World Legacy World Armor, that is also really amazing. And that's kind of the beauty of this particular card, it really synergizes well with the rest of this deck. In this particular scenario, I actually do like the Glial, so I'm actually going to add it to the hand. Everything else gets sent to the graveyard, but it's not really a big problem because the Shadow doesn't really do much in this situation. We already have Pawns to actually like set these 2 cards off. Receptor is definitely the least needed here. World Armor is great, sure, when you set this you could summon that, but it doesn't really do much on its own on the field. So yeah, and this is also your first turn, it has no purpose. And the Sorrow is something you could live without simply because you already have Pawns and you already have Caught by the Grave, so I wouldn't worry about losing this too much. Shadow, same thing applies. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll actually set the Glial, and I'll also set our Pawns, and we would set our Caught by the Grave. And keep in mind, if your opponent was trying to negate the Survivor from the very start, you always had the Caught by the Grave at the ready, so that's definitely very nice. And from that, that's also a really nice hand to start off with as well. Like I said, Krawlers, they don't look that intimidating, but honestly they're incredibly difficult to deal with, and I can guarantee you that you will never lose to an Altgeist player, you will never lose to an Eldritch player, you will never lose to a BA player, and you definitely will never lose to beat stick decks. So we're talking Blue Eyes, Dark Magician, Red Eyes, Buster Blader, all those decks stand no chance against this particular deck. Krawlers can just sit on this for a long time and really just draw out the game. Alright, now let's actually try going second. Although Krawlers do better going first, you have to also practice going second and seeing how you actually go here. We're not too much of an aggressive deck, but that being said, if we're not that aggressive, even though we're on the second turn and your opponent already went first to set up their board, they don't really have much to negate anyway, right? So definitely a really good start here. Alright, so we obviously have all of these. Firstly, I'm going to activate the terraforming to bait out the opponent because we have the survivor that we don't want to be negated by Ash. So you're going to activate terraforming. In this case, I am assuming the best case scenario, so very likely the opponent won't have the Ash. That's just being optimistic of myself here, but we're just going to go off the flow and add our shadow. We could activate the shadow, and now we could activate the World Legacy Survivor as well. So we're going to excavate the top 5 cards and see what we get. Pawns, definitely very powerful. We actually have the Mind Meld already. Unfortunately, we only have Ranvier and Deus Ex Krawler, so not looking good there. But we do have the Crusadia Krawler as well, so it's not too bad. I'm actually thinking we might need another Krawler after that. Parasite Paranoid, so that's going to the grave. Deus Ex Krawler's most likely going to the grave. World Legacy Sorrow, 2 of them. So yeah, not as good, but I'm still going to pick the pawns. I still think it's the best choice, and these will just simply go to the graveyard. Alright, so from here what we have is we could actually set these, obviously. This is going to be very intimidating for the opponent, so they're gonna be pretty hesitant to actually attack you, and they know you're playing Krawlers as well, so if you set this, then you got yourself a pretty nice defense, and depending on what your opponent wants to do, this is something that they're gonna have a hard time thinking about. It's definitely gonna test their mind. Alright, so for this opening hand, as we could see, we definitely have a very good start on trap cards. Honestly, I wouldn't worry too much. The only trap card we don't have here is World Legacy Pawns, but that's not a big deal here because we do have the Survivor, so let's try our luck here. Excavate the top 5 cards. We already got Mind Meld, no big deal. Dendrite's not too bad, we could actually ditch some cards to the graveyard. We have a Receptor, also very good. Another Axon, we don't really need it. And a Pawns, which is actually quite nice as well. In this case, let's rule out what we don't need. So we don't need the Mind Meld because we already have one. We probably don't need the Dendrite because Receptor is more superior. We also won't need the Axon because we already have it. In this case, it's between Receptor and Pawns. Unfortunately, with Pawns, the only way it could actually work effectively is if you actually have Spine or Receptor, and because you only have Axon in hand, Pawns doesn't really serve a great purpose. So because of that, I'm going to pick the Receptor. We're most likely going to be setting down our Receptor because it'll search for more Krawlers from the deck, but we also have Mind Meld, and we have 2 World Legacy Sorrow, and we also have the Crusadia Krawler just in case we need some extra body on the board. We're going to do one more test hand for going second, and we're going to cut the video from there. Alright, 6 cards, very nice here. This is our final test hand, and we're going to end the video right here. But overall, I do like the fact that we did actually end up going pretty strong. So firstly, let's activate the Survivor, simply because we already have 2 Survivors. So one of them will technically be a dead card, but that's okay. So let's excavate our top 5 cards. Another Spine, we don't need it. We have a Mind Meld, very powerful, yes. We have a Sorrow, not too bad as well. We have Back to the Front, it's going to the grave, and we have Dendrite. Very easy pick in this case. We have the Mind Meld. It's just far too powerful of a card to actually skip out on, so all of these will go to the grave. Don't worry, because these 2 kind of act as fodder in there anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. This still remains as a dead card, but keep in mind it is a spell, so you could always just set it down and keep it as bait that your opponent's actually intimidated. But that being said, you do have the Mind Meld to control the board. or control your opponent's effects. You also have pawns whenever you actually need to. You could activate the World Legacy in Shadow, and you could finally set your spine or even your beetle if you really wanted to go for some crazy plays there. But spine is one of the greatest choices to go with. I'm really glad that this final test hand actually ended very strongly, because this is the best test hand we could possibly get, or the best opening hand we could possibly get. We have a copy of spine, we have a copy of World Legacy in Shadow, which will obviously keep yourself protected in some sort of ways, because your opponent's going to be more hesitant to attack you. At the same time, you also have the pawns at the ready, and you also have the World Legacy's Mind Meld. You got yourself one of the greatest opening hands here. These are the 4 cards that are pretty much the dream cards for your opening hand. So that's pretty much it for this particular deck profile. I'm sorry if you guys couldn't actually see any combos, but the thing is this deck doesn't really combo that much. What you want to get is, you want to ideally open up with the most optimal cards in your hand, and in this case it seems everything worked out well, because that's the way I intended to build this deck. I wanted to build this deck in such a way where it was so consistent that you would be able to draw into these specific cards, and obviously that's falling into the whole combo, but at the same time it's incredibly easy to just search out all these cards, especially with the World Legacy Survivor, which definitely does a really amazing job. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this deck. Keep in mind that the Reversal Beetle is also a great alternative to the spine, so you don't always have to have spine. It could be Receptor, it could be Reversible Beetle, it could even be Dendrite to just send more Krawlers to the graveyard as fodder to prepare for your future plays. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this particular deck. The extra deck itself isn't really going into that much in this particular format, so only when the time comes will it actually come up. But for the time being, it's not the most active thing that's going to be here in our deck. Which I'm sure you guys are already thinking, you could actually just play Pot of Extravagance if you want to do some great draw power here. If you guys like this video, definitely give us a thumbs up, and also share this video with anyone who actually needs this. But at the same time, also subscribe for more videos like this. I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you next time.